So despite the approval of a draft statute to abolish criminal penalties for sex work back in November, sex workers' lives in this country, I'm afraid, remain at risk. Most of them continue to face violence and exploitation at the hands of their clients and in some cases by law enforcement officers. So how should the law be reviewed in order to finally protect sex workers, at least as has been the call by many activists? Let's have this discussion for you now. Bring in retired constitutional judge, that's Justice Edwin joining us via our video link this morning. Great to have you on the program as always, sir. Thanks very much indeed for making time to speak to us. That bill that was finally accepted by Cabinet is the Criminal Law, Sexual Offences and Related Matters Amendment Bill. It was approved, if you like, in November. But interestingly enough, it speaks to abolishing crimes of sex work. What does that actually mean? Because we've had discussions with people who are worried that perhaps it doesn't go far enough.
That may well be true, Ayanda, but what the bill does is a very important step. It's a crucial step in fixing up the relics of our disgraceful past in using the criminal law. So what it does, it's a very simple and short bill. It scraps the criminal provisions that punished people who sold sexual services, who sell sexual services. The second step, as Minister Lamola told us when he introduced the bill to the public at the end of November, is that there will be legislation to regulate sex work. We regulate where you can have a shebeen, where you can have a liquor store, where you can have a new mall. So all forms of trade interchange are regulated, and the same will apply to sex work.
Yeah. There's obviously going to be a raging debate around whether or not we should move in that direction. Those who are for the decriminalization of sex work speak to how this finally enables those in the industry to get the protection they need because of the exposure they've had over the years. Those who are concerned about this being legalized, though, point to the potential exploitation of sex workers. How do we address that concern at the very least?
Ayanda, there has been a pushback by the moralist lobby against the bill, and it's quite a powerful pushback. It's an internationally funded lobby that doesn't want the criminal law to stop moralizing about people.
Yeah.
Now, I, as a gay man, grew up in apartheid South Africa. We were punished for being gay. When I was in the 80s, a young man who came out, I was a human rights lawyer at the time, it was a risk to go to a gay bar, an open gay bar, because you knew the police could arrive in a moment. This is in the same category. The other obscene form of criminal law use under apartheid was, of course, interracial sex, where they would burst into people's bedrooms, they would test whether the sheets were warm. It was a disgraceful misuse of the law. The same is true of using the law to punish and persecute sex workers. We don't have the right as criminal law legislators or judges to find out what consenting adults are doing in private. And that's the one big feature of this law which Minister Lamola has introduced to the public. The second, of course, Ayanda, is the point that you raised, and it's a very important point. How do we best protect sex workers? There are risks in that work, as there are in many kinds of work, but the biggest risk at the moment is the fact that it's criminal, that sex workers are regularly, repeatedly arrested, that they are harassed by the police, that their clients know that because it's criminal, they can't go and complain if they're beaten up or if they're not paid. So we will introduce an important protection for women. That's a point that Minister Lamola made. He said this is part of our national strategic plan to reduce gender-based violence and to protect women. And undoubtedly the best way to do it is to scrap this vile, ancient, unacceptable law.
I'm so glad you bring up the moralist kind of aspect of this discussion, because I think it forms a huge part of the contestation, as it were. We do live in a secular society, but many people will tell you that there are several conservative communities such that even if this were to be what activists are calling for on paper, a lot of work needs to be done in order to at least, change perceptions at the very least, have discussions with people who interact with sex workers on the ground, so to speak. I wonder whether you reckon real shifts can take place in this country without us actually entering that moralist debate about whether or not some kind of value judgment needs to be placed on sex as a transaction in this country.
You put your finger on it exactly. Ayanda, we're not asking people to approve of sex work. As a gay man, I don't ask people to approve of the fact that I live with my partner. LGBTIQ people don't ask for people to stop their private views about the way that we live our lives and have sex. What we are saying is something more narrow. We're saying it's a very narrow issue. Should we use the criminal law to persecute people with whose private behaviors, unharmful to others, we disagree? Now, I'm not going to ask people to change their minds about sex work. I understand that people think that women shouldn't sell their bodies. It's a possibly legitimate point of view. What I do ask them to change their minds about is this misuse of the criminal law.
If that does take place, there's going to be questions, of course, around whether we should also start thinking about the regulation of the industry. I'm not sure if maybe I'm going too far, but if that were to happen, if this industry were to be regulated, is there enough clarity about how we should do that?
I can't answer that, Ayanda, because you're asking the right question. I don't know precisely how we should regulate sex work. Should we determine that there are areas where people can go to solicit, where they can drive their cars around? I don't know the practical aspects of that. Sweat and Sonke and other sex worker advocacy organizations have got views on that, and there will be an informed debate. The Minister said the next step is going to be a second set of legislation which will regulate that. I don't have particular insights about that practicality. Where should you allow this kind of trade? How best do you offer women health tests, for example?
Yeah.
And by the way, I'm speaking about women because overwhelmingly throughout human history, sexual services have been provided by women to straight men. But there are, of course, a minority of sex workers who are also men, providing services to women or to other men, and transgender people. And they, of course, are also at particular risk. But we need to be concerned about the health of all sex workers, and regulation may be part of that.
Right. And I suppose a big part of why this discussion becomes so important is because there are so many links that can be made between gender-based violence and just how rampant it is in this country, and essentially how exposed mostly women, as you've pointed out, are in sex work because they're not protected by the law in some instances. But there are also many other things connected to sex work because of the fact that it's illegal still in this country. And part of the question I suppose I'm asking in a very long-winded way is how far down you reckon we need to go. Sex work, in many instances, opens up people to human trafficking, etc., etc.
That is true. One of the ways in which this debate has been lighted and confused has been a confusion between human trafficking and sex work.
Yeah.
There's no doubt that there's large-scale human trafficking of people to go and work, to enslave people, and part of that is sex work. But there are many, many sex workers who have made a rational choice, maybe a choice with which your viewers don't agree, Ayanda, but a rational choice that this is the best way that they can feed their children, care for their parents, and pay for their own further studies. Many sex workers whom you see in Ilova, not far from where ENCA is, are busy studying. They're doing master's degrees, and that's the way they're paying for them. We shouldn't be judging them. So the point you make is not a long-winded or unimportant one, Ayanda. This goes back to our fundamental attitudes to women. We condemn women, we blame them for the HIV epidemic, when in fact it was more likely spread through sexual predation by men, not by unfaithfulness by women. But women get the blame. They get the blame if they are raped. They are treated as unclean or soiled. It's a horrific hangover from our subordination of women. And this little nasty statute is just one last historical blight on our use of the criminal law and our approach to women. And you're right to go back to the history of gender imbalances. We need to scrap this now.
All right, loud and clear. Justice Edwin Cameron, thanks very much indeed for speaking to us once again. I think public comments are open until the end of this month. Therein, of course, the rest of the process kicks in with Parliament at some stage expected to have their say. But retired Justice Edwin Cameron, once again, thanks very much indeed for your time.